What up, Wozards? It's Dev, Mtg, aka the 187 Kid, aka the Reverend Dr. Fisticuffs, aka Shank Hill, I'm going to go with for this video. And today we are finally circling the wagons, checking out some Pioneer content, so rustle up some varmints and cook up some vittles. I don't really know any Pioneer Days jokes, but anyway. It's been a couple of days since the Pioneer Challenge deck list came down the pipeline, and it's taken me that long to really gather my thoughts on all these decks. And when I say all these decks, I mean all these decks. We're going to look at the top 32 from the Pioneer Challenge today, and even though there's a lot of redundancies in the deck lists, we're still going to try and check out as much as we can every deck in this top 32, even just a little bit here, because there's a lot of, like, you know, small differences in card choices between even the decks that use the same win cons or are based around the same, you know, important and powerful cards. So even though, again, there's a fair amount of redundancy here in, you know, what the basic concept of some of these decks are, there's still enough differences in the way the decks have been built that I think there's some really interesting conversation to be had. So let's go ahead and get into it here. We got a lot to talk about. But the first place deck, the Pioneer Challenge, and that is Auras with a Sultai mid-range build of some kind that's in some ways based around these Planeswalkers, but the reason I've got Thoughtseize highlighted here is because this is one of the decks that showcases the power of not only Thoughtseize, but Fatal Push being in the same format. This is a really important thing to sort of digest, because we've saw a lot of decks that featured heavily around turn 1 Thoughtseize and then Fatal Push as a really, really low cost, you know, removal element. And having these in the same format really makes for a lot of decks that are based around, in some ways, you know, big, powerful cards, but always have these two cards as kind of backup interaction that's really important. So let me turn off that. Come back over here. I just wanted to bring these up real quick because you'll see Thoughtseize and Fatal Push as a 4-of tandem in a lot of decks over this last, you know, weekend with the Pauper Challenge. So, over this last weekend. You know what I'm trying to say. I'm so used to saying that with tournaments, but still. I mean, I guess it was over the weekend. But still, nonetheless, Thoughtseize and Fatal Push sort of form the backbone of a lot of black decks, and they make black like maybe the best color in all of Pioneer. So just keep that in mind. But in this case, you know, you see Oko, Thief of Crowns, which you will see a fair amount in this video. Not only is it one of the best, maybe the best card in all of Standard, hands down, might even deserve a ban in that format, but it is a power player in this format too, as lame as that might be to a lot of people. But Vraska Golgari Queen is another card we're seeing a lot of, mostly because 3-mana Planeswalkers are so powerful in this format. Not only 3-mana Planeswalkers, but this is a format with a fairly low curve. You see a lot of 1 and 2 drops in this format. There's a lot of aggro about that's trying to sort of make a foothold. And not only do cards like Thoughtseize and especially Fatal Push help against that aggro, those aggro decks, but Vraska can basically be another Abrupt Decay. And the reason I say another is because there's 4 Abrupt Decay in the deck already. So Vraska is just a, you know, double the mana cost, sorcery speed, Abrupt Decay that leaves a Planeswalker on the battlefield, which is pretty sweet, especially in a format where, you know, we're already seeing Vraska used as a sort of check on Oko in the Standard format, and that's happening here, only Vraska has a bunch of high-value targets other than just Oko, too. So, but aside from that, of course, Abrupt Decay, a prime player in the removal department in this deck. We've also got 1 copy of Assassin's Trophy, and a couple of Drown in the Loch as well. Aside from that, Dig Through Time is in the deck, but I was a little bit surprised at how few Dig Through Times there were in total. Same thing with Treasure Cruise. I still don't think that these cards are like smart investments. I've got a video coming out as soon as tomorrow, maybe the next day, about the top 5 or even 10 cards that are going to get banned in Pioneer, because they've already announced that until the end of the year, which is only a couple of months away, they're going to be really aggressive with the bannings in this format. So I think that it's maybe still time to not fully deeply invest in this format until you know exactly what the format looks like. And cards like Dig Through Time, I think, are just rife for being banned. But just this first round of results here, it doesn't look like as powerful as we thought it was going to be. That said, Dig Through Time is still a ridiculously powerful card, so it's playing a couple of copies. Now, as far as the Planeswalkers in the deck, I've already talked about Oko and Vraska, but Liliana, the Last Hope, is one that didn't actually show up too much in the Pauper Challenge, but it's still an outrageously powerful Planeswalker, and its ultimate can just win games by itself, and it's a great way to get value in long games, and decks like this basically look to turn the game into a slog. Very good at doing that, it's very grindy, and I really think that Sultai has not only some of the most potential in the Pioneer format, but also some of the most flexibility. We'll see that today. There's a lot of Sultai mid-range or Sultai Planeswalkers builds that did really well in the Pioneer Challenge, but a lot of them are built very differently, very disparately. So we'll get to that as we go through here. But just finishing this build of the deck up, there's also Jace Vryn's Prodigy, which I need to point out real quick. A lot of people were concerned about the power level of this card, and I still also don't think that this is quite the safest investment in the world right now. But I do think that Jace is another card that really surprised people by not being the format staple that we thought it was going to be going into this tournament. As a matter of fact, not too many people were even playing Jace Vryn's Prodigy in the main deck. I mean, we'll see it more than once over the course of this video, but again, people thought that this is going to be one of those cards where, like, you know, oh, I'm playing blue sources, so I'm going to play all 4 Jace Vryn's Prodigy, and it just wasn't necessarily like that, the way that a lot of people anticipated it would be. But that said, just like Dig Through Time, you know, you can say that it was kind of disappointing isn't the word, but it didn't perform at the level that we thought it would. You can say that, but it's still an outrageous Magic card. So, you know, all things considered, Jace Vryn's Prodigy is still a ridiculous card that's probably going to impact the format a good bit. That said, Gilded Goose. Saw a lot of Gilded Gooses in the Pioneer Challenge, you know. We also saw a lot of, you know, other 1-mana green creatures that ramp. We'll get to it before too long, but Gilded Goose surprised me with the amount of play that it actually saw, being able to fix your mana to this level, even on turn 2, really important. And Pioneer may be, you know, a turn 3 format, a turn 2 format even, where that is the optimal turn to start doing what your deck is supposed to be doing. And in a format like that, Gilded Goose is not only an important card, but it helps make the format like that in the first place. So really surprised by Gilded Goose showing up in so many decks, but I probably shouldn't have been. There's also Courser of Kruphix too. Another good little value engine for a deck like this that's looking to play out the long game. And it was always a great card while it's in Standard, and it was a good card in Modern too, in like the Collected Company decks and such some of the time. So I'm not surprised that a value engine like this is seeing play in a deck that's looking to put together multiple value engines. You know, Jace Vryn's Prodigy, Courser of Kruphix, Liliana, Oko, all that, but also Tireless Tracker, another really good value engine that saw a lot of like 1 and 2 of play at the Pioneer Challenge. This is another one that people were like, oh, you're in green, you play 4 Tireless Tracker when the format was first announced, but that has proven to be untrue. But you do play some number of, you know, Tire Tracks in your deck because it's still just a ludicrous value engine, which is what the Sultai deck is trying to do in the first place. You know, it's got Thoughtseize in there, it's got Fatal Push in there, Abrupt Decay, just the best removal and disruption in the entire format, backed up by these insane value engines like Last Hope and, you know, Vryn's Prodigy. So just a wonderfully constructed deck, but a lot of these Sultai decks are like that, and they won't all include the same cards, but they're all effectively Sultai value engines that take advantage of having the best removal and disruption in the format in the form of those 3 cards. So moving on though, let's get to a completely different deck that a lot of folks didn't necessarily see coming. There was one Reddit post on Spikes that I saw where someone was like, isn't Phoenix wide open in this format? And apparently it is, because this is not the only Arclight Phoenix deck in this top 32. Arclight Phoenix performed very well at the Pauper Challenge. Better so than people would have thought, especially considering not a whole lot of people played it. But the people that did play it placed very well in the tournament, because a lot of people just aren't game planning against Arclight Phoenix, or at least I think that's the reason. But it also gets Thing in the Ice, which is a card that it pairs very well with and is still just this insane monster in this format. I hate that. What, can I not transform the card on Wizard's own thing? If that's crazy, right? Like, what if I just go Thing in La ISO? That's how it's said, right? whatever other language that was supposed to be. We go to Awoken Horror here. So when it transforms into horror, you get a 7/8 that returns everything else to everybody's hand. I just wanted to remind myself and everybody else, because it's been a minute, since we've seen the thing in the ice, I keep wanting to refer to it by its nickname, but that'll probably get me demonetized. So, let me just say that the Arclight Phoenix plus thing in the ice decks have been really, really performing much better than we would have thought. And they get access to stuff like Treasure Cruise, one of the best cards that a deck like this could ever want to play. But they still get Charter Course. Some versions play Strategic Planning, but not all. Plus you got your madness stuff like Fiery Temper, Lightning Axe. You've got Opt in this deck, Wild Slash, which is just a strictly better shock for all intents and purposes, and it was actually one of the most played cards at the Pioneer Challenge. It turns out that this is actually a really important removal piece at time being. Plus, you get Izzet Charm, and who doesn't want to play Izzet Charm? This is like one of my favorite charms. I'm just super stoked to see it here. But, you know, it definitely does at least one thing, the third mode, that the deck really wants to do. But it's also just, you know, decent removal, a counterspell when you might need it to protect, well, you know, whatever you're trying to do at the moment. So, Izzet Charm just an all-star in the deck. But mostly this is an Arclight Phoenix deck that also gets to play Merchant of the Veil. But it's an Arclight Phoenix deck. And again, I didn't think that everyone was necessarily expecting that over the weekend. But I'm going to keep saying that. But still, Arclight Phoenix might be one of those decks that's a glass cannon, and now that people know more to prepare for it, they will do so. But at least at this tournament, it was a really powerful player. Now, you may notice that I didn't go over the sideboard of the Sultai deck, and there's a reason I didn't do that. And I will briefly touch on some boards here, but just a quick aside before we move on to the third place deck. I'm going to try to keep this brief, but because I hope you'll understand what I'm getting at here. But I don't think it's the best time to focus on sideboards right now. It's important to know what's in these sideboards and why. Don't get me wrong, but sideboards are meant to change for so many reasons this early in the format. When people don't know exactly what to game plan against just yet, they have vague ideas of what to game plan against, but they don't know exactly what the format looked like just yet when this format was registered, when this tournament was registered for. So there's that. Plus the bannings are going to be so aggressive in the next couple of months that I think that a lot of these sideboard cards are going to be null and void, and sideboards are going to be completely different in just, you know, 4 to 6 weeks, if even that long. So I just don't think it's that important to focus on the boards that much at present, because they're so liable to change drastically over the next even 2 weeks, as early as that. So, plus again, now that people know what to game plan more for, the sideboards will change just as a factor of that. You know, these are the least important sideboards that we're going to see throughout the entire Pioneer format's existence. So keep that in mind. But let's move on to Aspiring Spike, who got third place and I think has graduated to actual Spike at this point. But this is yet another Thoughtseize deck. Effectively, you know, Thoughtseize and Fatal Push plus Abrupt Decay. You know, we see a Sultai mid-range deck that plays far fewer Planeswalkers. They're just going with 4 Oko here. And then they've kind of pumped up the creature category, you know, Courser of Crewfix. Scavenging Goose is a really interesting little meta call right now that I really like and probably did help them out against these, you know, Arclight Phoenix decks. But you also see Cletus in here, our old friend Cletus from the backwoods. It's actually another really interesting metagame call, and you can't necessarily, you know, fault them too much because they got third place. Saw Cletus in a few of these sideboards from this format, from this tournament, but playing in the main deck is a really interesting call, mostly because people expected the format to be a little bit faster than this. But if you're trying to grind, this really just brick walls aggro. It helps you get a few turns later into the game where you can take control. Really like the main deck inclusion of Cletus here, but there's also Jace Vryn's Prodigy, you know, just kind of all the hits. You know, the 1 copy of Assassin's Trophy. They've gone all the way up to 3 copies of Dig 3 Time, but they're still playing 2 copies of Drown in the Loch. They've gone for a copy of Hero's Downfall, and they've fallen down to 2 copies of Opt to adjust and, you know, make room for some of these other calls here. So I really like what they've done with the place in this deck too, but I think I like the more Planeswalker-centric build of the deck. And even though cards like, you know, Cletus and Scavenging Goose in the main deck looks pretty, I'm actually, even though they got third place, so who am I, but I'm still not sure they're the best calls, especially in week 2 of the format. So keep that in mind. Now, fourth place, we get to our first Mono Blue Devotion build, and this is actually one of the only Mono Blue Devotion builds that did really well, at least in the Pauper, I keep wanting to call it Pauper, but in the Pioneer Challenge. And this, I'm surprised more players aren't on, because it's just a really, I won't call it linear, because it's not. It's very versatile, gives you a lot of options on given turns, and sort of how you want to play out your curve, that it gives you a lot of options in that avenue too. So I won't call it linear. I think that's like way beyond the pale, but sort of the choices that you make when you build the deck are, again, not simple, and not obvious, but you get so many like ultra powerful cards for this deck that almost no matter how you build it, you're building it right. It starts with Thassa, God of the Sea, one of your biggest payoffs. 2 devotion in the deck. You just get a 3-mana 5/5 indestructible. That's crazy. And she's a great mana sink. Obviously, we've all played with Thassa just a few years ago. Mono Blue Devotion was a fun deck back then. Still a fun deck now. And this deck kind of it was kind of a cult hit. It was kind of an underground underdog when the tournament first started. It was one of those decks that people were just really excited about because they loved playing Mono Blue Devotion back in the day. And they wanted to do the same thing and make it work in this format. And apparently it has, because, 4th place. Thassa's a great mana sink. She's an awesome, investment. Only 3 mana for what you're getting is just ridiculous. Plus you get Tempest Djinn, and Tempest Djinn along with Thassa just almost guarantees that Thassa can swing. So it's ridiculous what these 2 cards just do together by themselves. Plus, you have a good 1-drop in Siren Stormchamber to get things going that can protect your other creatures that are really important. Merfolk Trickster to kind of give you some tempo and help you play tricks appropriately enough in the early game. You can set up Master of Waves and get just a ton of, 2/1s. So that also still works the way it did back in the day. Harbinger of the Tides, still another really crazy tempo piece in a deck like this. And then Brazen Borrower again. So you just got all of the best tempo. You got Merfolk Trickster, Brazen Borrower, Harbinger of the Tides to kind of mess your opponent's game plan up in the early game and get some value on your side of the table at the same time. And then when it comes down to, turn 3, turn 4, you can start slapping down Thassas, Tempest Djinns, Master of Waves, and just take the game over. It's just crazy how much value you're generating on each turn, or sort of how good of a card you're playing on each turn. Mono Blue Devotion, just especially past like the 2nd turn, just has some of the craziest plays in the entire format in 1 card. Plus you get to play Smuggler's Copter in this deck, which is never bad. Mutavault, always sweet too, just gives you 4 free creatures. And then Quench looks like a really weird call for a deck like this, but again, this is effectively a tempo deck, along with Brazen Borrower, a Merfolk Trickster. Your turn 2 is mostly just attempting to play at instant speed and generate tempo in some way. So Quench is really good for doing that. And with people that are trying to like ramp into Okos and other 3-mana walkers right now, Quench is just a really good call. We see that in Standard, where Quench is actually it's a really good meta call right now against these Oko decks. And, it's kind of the same way in Pioneer. Quench is just not a perfect card, and it's far from Mana Leak, but it's the best we got, so we'll definitely take it as a metagame call, and I think it's a very good one at this point in time. But next we got Mental Misstep with 5th place. We see our first Healy Felidar combo deck. And cat combo, the actual cat combo, not cat food from current Standard. I feel like the cat food combo deck is a way of Wizards trying to sort of erase their mistakes from the past and make us forget what cat combo actually is. But no, this is old school cat combo that had to be banned. Emergency banned. Healy Rye, Felidar Guardian, make a bajillion, it doesn't really matter how many you make infinite cats, and just swing in that turn and win the game. But how people went about building around these 2 cards was very different over the weekend. We saw control shells, mid-range shells, and shells that try to ramp into it as quickly as possible. A lot of them, incorporate elements of 2 of those or all 3. Here you see Gilded Goose, Lawnel Elves, Elvish Mystic as a 3-2 split. You just want 5 of this card in your deck, along with Gilded Goose. That gives you 9 different turn 1 ramp spells. They'll make sure that you get Oko on turn 2, or even that you get Healy Rye on turn 2, which is even possible off of Elvish Mystic. So, Teferi, Time Raveler, just an all-around good card. You get Heart of Kirin, which you can, crew with your Planeswalkers or your creatures in this deck. And then Oath of Nyssa, another really popular card at this tournament, just because it's amazing selection for just 1 mana in these decks that otherwise don't really have access to it, or you don't have better access to it. Like these blue decks, it's like, oh, should I play Opt or Oath of Nyssa? Well, Oath of Nyssa in a deck like this that has a bunch of permanents is just a just a much better card than a card like Opt, for instance. So you saw a lot of Oath of Nyssa over the weekend too. Just an amazing turn one play if you don't get a Mystic or a Gilded Goose, and it's just good when any turn that you might draw it. Other than that, there's sort of ban cards.deck. There's Reflector Mage in here, which was sort of maybe banned for no reason, in its standard environment at least. And then Rogue Refiner, which was also banned from the Mtg Deck. So this is just ban stuff. We're just going to play ban cards in this deck. And I can see why. Both of these, Reflector Mage and Rogue Refiner, are just really, really good value creatures. They put a nice little body on the battlefield, buy you a couple of turns, and especially with Reflector Mage, buying a couple of turns is really all you want in this deck, where you're trying to get to cat combo safely. That's why Brazen Borrower is also in the deck as a tempo play. If you need to, you can block with your mana accelerators and all that. Or you can just ramp into Healy, Felidar Guardian. Now, people know exactly what you're trying to do as soon as you slap down Healy or Felidar, so you kind of have to do this in the same turn, which is another reason that you see a lot of these mana rampers. Spend the first 3 turns either ramping or playing defense with Brazen Borrower and Reflector Mage and stuff. Find the cards that you need for the combo with Oath of Nyssa and all that. And then just try and Healy, Felidar Guardian on the same turn. Or if you have ways of protecting one or the other, do it on sequential turns. But for the most part, you want to get this all done, one and done at the same time. So a lot of these decks are focused on either ramping or holding down the first couple of turns, establishing control, and then doing the combo. And this deck kind of has ways of doing both of those things. Control in, we got stuff like Oko and Teferi, Brazen Borrower, Reflector Mage. But on the ramp end, you've got your Gilded Gooses, your Lana Werewolves, your Elvish Mystics, all that. So also, Once Upon a Time, Wild Slash, another card that holds down the early game, kills early creatures, keeps people off of their combos and stuff. So, just again, really like the way that this deck is constructed, and it was the best cat combo deck on the day. That said, I don't know about cat combo's longevity in this format, but we'll go to 6th place. This is another cat combo deck. This one built somewhat similarly to Fairy Time Raveler. In this deck, you've got Healy, Felidar Guardian, Gilded Goose, Lana Werewolves. We're trying to ramp into the combo. And if we need to, we can hold down the 4 with Teferi and Oko and all that, establish either board presence or control of some kind. All 4 copies of Rogue Refiner in this deck is a card advantage piece. It also trades on the ground, keeps us in the game for a little bit longer. Attune with Ether to get our lands, energy actually matters in this deck, mostly because of the Ether hub. In the lands here. Sorry, I tripped over my words there, but Ether Hub is in a lot of these mana bases, especially in the decks that are 4 or even 5 color. Ether Hub features very heavily, but with Rogue Refiner or Attune with Ether, you've got plenty of ways, and in this deck, Harness Lightning, plenty of ways to generate the energy you need to actually get the colors that you want out of Ether Hub. So, and if you've got extra mana or energy laying around you don't need for Ether Hub, you just pump it into a Harness Lightning. So that's kind of a neat call. But there's also, the 4 Oath of Nyssa in this deck for the card selection, 2 Heart of Kirin because your Planeswalkers can crew it. So this is, this and the last build are more sort of Planeswalker tribal Healy decks that have ways of ramping into Planeswalkers. I like the way these decks are built because even if you don't get cat combo, it's versatile enough that the cards you did draw are still worth ramping into. The Planeswalkers that you drew are still worth getting on turn 2. Your Oko, your Teferi, all that. So I like that. Even if the deck doesn't present you with one of the cards from cat combo right away in your opening hand, you've almost certainly got a good plan going into the early turns of the game. So I, again, really enjoy the way that this deck and the last one are built because they're really, accounting for a lot of different variables. And moving on to 7th place, another Arclight Phoenix decks. This one plays Royal Scions, makes plenty of sense. Crackling Drake as well. It's more of a Drake's build, I guess, from the last season, incorporating Royal Scions now. And it's also, though, got 4 Arclight Phoenix, 4 Thing in the Eyes, 4 Charter Course, 3 Treasure Cruise, which they've gone down to 3 so they can incorporate a entrancing melody, which is a really cool meta call. Really cool meta call. But along with that, Izzet Charm, Lightning Axe, Opt, Thrill of Possibility, instead of strategic planning like the last deck. And I think this is just the better card, so yes. And then Wild Slash as well in this deck. Now, Wild Slash did see a lot of play because a lot of decks played red. You had your mono reds here and there. You had decks like Phoenix. You had decks like Healy, that have to play red. And a lot of these decks played Wild Slash. So again, it's one of the most played cards over the weekend. Pick up your Wild Slashes if you don't already have them. But, what can you say about a Phoenix deck that I haven't already said at this point. Just a combination of Phoenix and Thing in the Ice being in the same format, but not in a format as deep as, say, Modern. A format that Phoenix is already good in. Arclight Phoenix is already awesome in that format. It's gonna rule a format like this. Even without a card like, the Faithless Looting. Faithless Looting got banned. Arclight Phoenix is more or less done in Modern, but it lives on in this format even without a card like Looting, because things are sort of scaled down in power level from a format like Modern. So really like the meta call of Arclight Phoenix, and note that we've seen 3 in the top 8. That's a very good deck in this current format. 4 in the top 8, because now we have another Arclight Phoenix deck. This one finally incorporates Jace Vryn's Prodigy, and it only plays 2 Thing in the Ice because it knows which one's the actual important creature. But most of the deck is built almost exactly the way we've seen this deck being built so far. Charter Course, Treasure Cruise, Fiery Temper, Izzet Charm, Lightning Axe, Opt, Wild Slash. Very, very similar build. Just Phoenix is a deck to beat because no one's trying to beat it. But now that everyone knows it's a real factor, I think that it's going to see a lot more, contention as it tries to establish a place in the Pauper meta. But moving on here, 9th place. We've got another sort of Thoughtseize deck that plays, it's basically, Sultai mid-range. But this one plays Grimflayer. I think it's a really, really cool call. I'm not sure that it was worth the slots, Only got 9th place, which is actually still really, really highly, placed. You're in the top 16. You're doing pretty well for yourself. But at the same time, I do think that, soaking up these 3 slots on, soaking up these 3 slots on Grimflayer maybe didn't prove to be the best idea, but I didn't see any of these games on camera or anything, so who am I to say? But Grimflayer looks like an interesting meta call that gets really big quick, and it's sort of like the Tarmogoyf for the format, One card that people were a little surprised didn't show up so much was Glintsleeve Siphoner. As a 2-drop, that just seemed like a card that was going to be everywhere. The Bob, the Dark Confidant of the format, the closest thing the format has to that card. And we just really did not see too much of it. So it's surprising that a deck that played this as their 2-dropper instead of Glintsleeve ended up in the the top 10 or the top 16. So I just think it's a really interesting thing to absorb, and there's multiple ways you can look at it from. Well, this deck didn't finish in the top 8, so was Grimflayer really a good choice considering that 2 other Sultai decks finished above it? Or was Grimflayer a good choice considering that this deck, didn't play a bunch of other 2-drops it had access to and still finished higher than a lot of other Sultai decks of the event? So a couple of ways to look at it, but for the most part, the deck is very similar to some of the other Sultai decks we've seen. A couple, of course, your Crufix, long game value, Jace's Prodigy value, Kalitas in the main, Scavenging Ooze in the main, again, metagame calls, Tireless Tracker in the main, value engine, Oko and Liliana, just crazy value engines. So, this is just the time-honored rock, this is the rock, time-honored mid-range tradition of playing the best removal and disruption that you can possibly get your hands on, while also playing all of the best, grindy sort of value engines too. So just a time-honored strategy that worked at this tournament. Usually, excuse me, I apologize for that cough, but now my voice sounds much more pleasant. But usually, playing a control-ish build that has, metagame-dependent, card slots and calls in it isn't necessarily the best idea in week 1 of a format. But just based on Reddit posts and what was kind of going around online, I think a lot of people did know mostly what to game plan here for. Namely cat combo. That was a big one. That's why you see so many like pithing needles and stuff in and in sideboards if you're paying attention. But people mostly did know in some way what to game plan for in this tournament. So that said, control I think was a little bit better in week 1 than it usually is. Although we didn't see too many like dedicated control lists with counter spells or anything. This is still very much a control deck, turn 1 Thoughtseize and then play at instant speed with Fatal Push, Abrupt Decay, Assassin's Trophy, And even though it does play a bunch of creatures, it looks like a typical mid-range deck, and very much is. It still plays in a lot of ways, like a control deck would, in that it establishes control of the game and then plunks down a value engine. So, you know, it has that going over an average control deck that does play counter spells. It doesn't have to play the entire game at instant speed or anything. You know, if it's playing against a more dedicated, control-y, slow roll build, it has threats. It has things it can throw down, but if it's playing against a, you know, a faster build, it's got plenty of answers against them too. So it's very flexible. I like mid-range decks like this, and it's no surprise that even in week 1, a deck with so many meta-dependent calls did so well. So keep that in mind. But on to probably might be my favorite deck in the entire Pioneer Challenge. This is a Xiii deck. This is Mono Black Devotion, basically. And a lot of people were really stoked about Mono Black and getting to play Xiii again, going in this format. But, you know, it didn't really do great at this tournament. And I'm sure that's probably because not many people were playing the deck in the first place, especially not this build of the deck. But this build is super interesting and really showcases the power of Thoughtseize and Fatal Push. You know, again, these sort of form the backbone of what this deck can do in terms of interaction. And a lot of the other stuff the deck can do it's just based on, you know, really powerful synergy with, you know, Devotion. Like, not only are we playing Gray Merchant, but the cards that have been printed since Devotion was a thing in Theros Standard have just been, you know, really conducive to a good Devotion deck. You know, Sorin doesn't look like the best card in terms of, you know, gathering Devotion, but when it can just plunk down a Champion of Dusk on the turn it hits the table, that's 3 black Devotion on turn 3. Plus you've got Drana, that's 2 black Devotion on turn 3. Gifted Aetherborn, 2 black Devotion on turn 2. Crazy card. Miss Gifted Aetherborn so much. You know, young, black, and gifted, like my favorite nickname for a card ever. Gray Merchant, of course. Kalidas in the deck. Knight of the Ebon Legion, just one of the best, you know, black 1-drops we've seen in a really long time. Stromkirk Condemned to put, you know, +1/+1 counters on all your on all your vampires, excuse me. It's just a really crazy deck that gets to combine vampires and Devotion. And it's so cool. It's such a cool idea for a deck because it's really interesting how well these two ideas gel together. You know, Stromkirk Condemned, lots of Devotion, also a vampire. Gifted Aetherborn, lots of Devotion, also a vampire. Drana, lots of Devotion, vampire. Champion of Dust, vampire, lots of Devotion. So I just really like the way the two ideas sort of gel together. And again, just really proves the power of what Thoughtseize and Fatal Push can do in a deck and what they can allow you to build. It's just such a crazy list that doesn't look like it has any business being in the top 10, but Clyde the Glide is always good for a good list. Just so you know, this is a very good Magic player on MTGO, but at the same time, just a really, really cool deck coming with the fire, like the really unexpected tech, you know. So many people were excited about Gray Merchant, but not many people actually pulled the trigger on playing the deck. I'm glad that Clyde did. Just a really sick list that I'm very excited about for the Pioneer format. But anyway, let's move on to 11th place, another Healy list. Who cares, right? This one's actually playing Lava Coil and Anticipate, a little bit differently built than the last couple of Healy lists. Very differently built. You know, this one's playing very few permanents in comparison, and again, more of a find your cards and, you know, draw stuff build. Counter spells with Spell Pierce, you know, got Thrill of Possibility in there, Fiery Impulse to kill stuff, Dig Through Time, all of them, Anticipate in there, all 4, you know, just a much more combo centric, you know, very traditional combo build that's mostly built to try to find the combo more than it is, you know, control the game at all points. And I think that the decks that were more equipped to actually interact definitely did better at this tournament, and that's obvious to see. But still, 11th place is not bad. So if you're looking strictly to find the combo and not interact as much, I mean, the deck does play Lava Coil, it does play Fiery Impulse, so, you know, Spell Pierce, you are interacting, but the amount of interaction in the deck and the amount of board presence you have is much lower than the other decks that did a little bit better. But that said, again, 11th is very good. Now, moving on, we get our first Nyssa deck. Okay. Very popular deck at the tournament. You know, some form of Nyssa ramp thing. Extremely popular, but they all fell out of the top 8. In fact, out of the top 11, for that matter. That said, I do think that this is still a viable Pioneer strategy. It just needs to work the kinks out because a lot of these decks are built very differently. This one is one of the few decks that's not mono green. that plays Nyssa. This is actually Simic. You get Hydroid Krasis in this deck. You get Oko, Thief of Crowns, Kiora, Master of Depths. Really interesting card advantage piece that also lets you untap, lands that are made into creatures with Nyssa and all that. Get more mana. So, cool, one of in the deck. You also get Once Upon a Time, Oath of Nyssa, Leyline of Abundance to work with your Elvish Mystics and your Lana War Elves. You're playing basically 8 of this in this deck, plus Sylvan Caryatid. So, just so much mana ramp in this deck to make sure you can get to Nyssa on turn 3. And if you actually get your Leyline of Abundance, for free on turn 1, this is just maybe the most effective ramp deck possible in this format right now. You get Hydroid Krasis as one of your big payoffs, but Walking Ballista as your other huge payoff. Now you do get Pelucranos in the deck too. It's been a long time since we've gotten to play with Pelucranos. Excited about that, but obviously Krasis is the big payoff in this build of the deck. But usually in the mono green builds, it's almost always going to be Walking Ballista. So a lot of 4 of Ballistas at the tournament. A lot of people worried about how good this card was going in, and I mean worried about whether or not the card has to be banned. It's that good going into this format. But I'm not sure. Seeing the results of this, week 1, very early tournament, not really enough to decide anything at this moment. But still, Walking Ballista was very heavily played, but there's a lot of builds that did much better. That said, if they do ban a card from, say, Cat Combo, then these Nyssa decks with Walking Ballista immediately start top 8ing a lot. So, is it healthy for the format? That remains to be seen, but it's definitely a conversation you have to have. But the deck really isn't that complicated. I've already talked about pretty much every card in the deck at this point, because it's just a dedicated ramp deck. Get to Nyssa on turn 3, do crazy things like Krasis Ballista. And it turns out that even in a format like Pioneer, which is much more powerful than Standard even, much deeper, that's still a really good strategy. So, moving on to 13th, we've got another Healy deck. This one a little bit more control-oriented. You got Supreme Verdict in there. Plus a Braid, Censor, another counterspell, Dig 3 time, Hieroglyphic Illumination. Is it Charm, Opt? You see a lot of these cycling cards from Amonkhet block in the deck, like Hieroglyphics and Censor and all that. Detention Spear in the deck for a little bit of control, too. So, this one does play Dig Through Time, Is It Charm to help find the combo, but it's still got Is It Charm to help counter spells, as well as a couple of other things like Censor to help counter spells in the early game, because that's where it matters the most in this format. Detention Sphere and Supreme Verdict to help, keep important things off the table until you can actually get to your combo. So again, a very different way of building the Cat Combo deck, but in this case, at the very least, didn't come across as well as sort of the other 4-color builds that we saw. So moving on here to Pika Power with 14th place, another Nyssa deck that plays Leyline of Abundance, 4 Elvish Mystic, 4 Lana War Elves, Burning Tree Emissary, getting some mana. Once Upon a Time, Oath of Nyssa. In Nykthos, by the way, I should point this card out because it's been in a few of the mana bases so far. Very important card in this first tournament, and will probably continue to be. I don't see why it wouldn't. Just even in decks that aren't really dependent on devotion in general, Nykthos has been very, very important, and especially in these ramp decks. There's going to be almost a 4 of just about every time. So, but in this deck also, you've got all your creatures that ramp, plus a couple of really interesting little calls. Nylea, God of the Hunt. We've got so much devotion to green, we might as well play 1 copy of Nylea. Questing Beast, interesting, right? Let's test and see if the card is as good here as it is in Standard. Rishkar, Pima Renegade. Just kind of a way to not only put a little bit more power on the battlefield, but also to get more value out of Leyline of Abundance. So that's really cool. Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, ramp, payoff. Walking Ballista, all 4 of them, ramp payoff. This is one of the mono green builds I was talking about that really is able to leverage cards like Nykthos a little bit more, and gets access to things like Nylea, which you're probably not going to play in the blue-green build. So, interesting way to build the deck. You even get Burning Tree, which is good for devotion, good for ramp and all that, or at least good for big explosive turns. Double Burning Tree on turn 2 is still good. So, really interesting deck. I especially do like the inclusion of Burning Tree here. But, these ramp decks, even the ones that include Spice, like Burning Tree, just weren't that interesting to me. We see a lot of Nyssa and Hydroid Krasis and stuff in Standard already. I had gotten way sick of Walking Ballista before it rotated. Before it rotated, and I'm even more sort of wary of it in this format. Again, I'm not saying it needs to be banned or anything, but I'm wary of Walking Ballista. Especially think if you ban other cards and don't ban Walking Ballista, it immediately becomes like a really dominant force in this format, especially with how much we can ramp. With 15th place, we got another Healy deck. This one is actually a lot closer to the first few decks that we saw. You know, Reflector Mage, Rogue Refiner, Wild Slash Once Upon a Time, Heart of Kirin at 2, Oath of Nyssa, Oko, Teferi, Saheeli, and Felidar Guardian. So just a very, very similar build, especially to the first build that we came across here. Just, I guess, didn't get the same draws or matchups. So this really goes to illustrate that just because some of these decks got 11th, 12th, 13th place doesn't mean they're still not some of the best decks in the format. They may have had bad days. They may have had bad draws. They may have had bad matches. You never know. So let's keep that in mind. You know, this is built very similarly to the first couple of builds. So it doesn't necessarily invalidate the more control-y or combo-centric, you know, traditional combo builds of Cat Combo. Who knows? But I do think that these, you know, more Planeswalker-centric builds are probably the best way to go with all the results we have so far. Just keep that in mind. 16th place, the halfway point here. Another ramp deck. This one also playing Burning Tree Emissary, but not really looking for the same value in terms of, you know, devotion or anything. We're not playing Nylea in this one, but pretty much every other card is very, very similar. You know, we've got Hydroid Krasis, so it's a Simic deck. Nick throws Shrine to Nick. Still, even though we are trying to make some blue mana, we're still very devoted to green here, so it's not that hard. Ulamog is a ramp payoff. Walking Ballista is one of the other big ramp payoffs. I mean, again, these decks, another thing that bores me about them is that there's just really not going to be a whole lot of variation between all the mono green decks. You know, they're very similarly built every time, and they're also kind of like, I don't know, like the card choices are so obvious that it's kind of ho-hum. You know, oh, we can ramp into Nyssa on turn 3 really easily in this format because we get to play 4, you know, 2 different Llanowar Elves. We get to play 8 Llanowar Elves. So, and Sylvan Carry added, which is like a better version of Paradise Druid. So let's just ramp into Nyssa on turn 3 like we do in Standard and do even more busted stuff like playing Enormous Walking Ballista. I mean, it's just really, it's a very easy thought process to go through. And I'm not really like dissing the deck because I think it's a very good, powerful deck. I just think that, you know, it's one of those week 1 options that was so obvious that, like, why don't you play it? And it's probably going to continue to be an option in Pioneer beyond week 1. I just think that it's not a very innovative deck. You know, I'm not as excited about this as I was the Grey Merchant deck that plays a bunch of stuff that's been printed since Grey Merchant was legal, right? So just moving on here. Let's go to 17th place. We see our first mono red deck with Eidolon of the Great Rebel as sort of the centerpiece of the deck. But I was excited about mono red in general, mostly because Monastery Swiftspear. This is one of my favorite cards from the past, like, 5 years. Monastery Swiftspear is just such an unbelievable Magic card, and it's still going to be in the Pioneer format. And I was very excited to play things like Monastery Swiftspear alongside cards like, you know, Wizard's Lightning. Even though Swiftspear isn't a wizard, I was still very happy to be able to play, you know, effectively a Bolt in the same format with Swiftspear. Plus, you know, we get Soulscar Mage from Amonkhet. We get to Lava Runner, just Bomat Courier, just all the best 1-drops that have been printed in the last few years. We get to play in this deck along with Eidolon. So we establish presence with a really good 1-drop on turn 1 pretty much every game. And then turn 2, we can play Eidolon and just start really bleeding our opponent. I really like this mono red deck an awful lot. Even though it got 17th, I think a lot of people are prepared, especially with Fatal Push and Abrupt Decay, for decks like this. I still think that, you know, what is effectively a burn deck is still a really good option for a format like this. You don't get to play Lightning Bolt, which sucks. You know, it's probably like the biggest difference between a deck like this in terms of what it looks like here and what it looks like in Modern. Not being able to play Lightning Bolt is a huge downer, but you do effectively still get Wizard's Lightning, you still get Lightning Strike, you still get Wild Slash, you get Smuggler's Copter in this iteration. Light Up the Stage is a really good card advantage piece. Just the way that this mono red deck is built makes me drool a little bit. You know, I just said that I was not too excited about the mono green decks and how they were built and how obvious the card choices were, and you could make the same points about this deck. I'm just naturally more excited about mono red. And the thing is, I try to be fair. I like mono red as a deck. I always have. It can get a little tiresome in some formats when it's like the best choice. But I think that this is an indication that we've hit into a format where mono red is a viable option to play, and it's got a lot of really good card choices, but it's nowhere near the best deck in the format. It might be tier 1, it might be tier 1.5 or something, but you can't make the argument, it looks like so far, that mono red is a broken deck or, you know, a gross deck, it's not fun to play against, and I hate it, it's oppressive. You can't make that argument from what we can tell from these early results. So I think they've hit a really good balance with how good mono red actually is. And I think that's actually important. So just wanted to throw that in here. Just because I like mono red doesn't mean I'm not objective, or it doesn't mean I'm biased or anything. I think mono red should be a good deck, but not the best deck in the format. And they've definitely hit a good balance here. So I just wanted to point that out. Moving on to 18th place, we've got another sort of mono red deck. This is effectively mono red, but excuse me. The mana base is such that you can easily play Boros Charm in this deck as the only card with white in it. And this is a much more burn-centric deck. You still have Eidolon, Hazoret in this deck too. I had a couple of people ask me if Hazoret was going to be a viable card in Pioneer. And I would have told them no. Honestly, I don't think that Hazoret is a very good card for Pioneer. It looks very slow, you know. But, you know, one copy of Hazoret showed up in a few decks. So it's not... It might get cut. I mean, the fact that it's a one-of in the decks that it did show up in is kind of indicative of the place that it is in the format right now. These appear to be more, you know, lab-based, you know, just in case, hey, let's test Hazoret, see if this card is worth playing. That's often what a one-of can be indicative of, especially this early in the format, you know. I don't know if Hazoret's good enough, but let's try her as a one-of and see what happens. And I think that's actually a good spot for these decks. They're trying to fill out slots. I think Hazoret is just good enough for a one-of, you know. But you've still got Monastery Swiftspear, Rampaging Ferocidon in this build of the deck. We'll see if that gets cut or not. And then Soulscar Mage as well, you know, Smuggler's Copter. Just the best 1 and 2 drops you could possibly play. Backed up by a bunch of burn. Boros Charm, Searing Blood in this version of the deck. Glad to be able to play this, you know, burn spell again. Shock, Wild Slash, Lightning Strike. I mean, it basically plays 6 shocks. This is a much more dedicated burn deck than the last mono red deck, and I do think this one has a chance too. And I like when burn is a viable option, but it's not the best option. And again, I think they've hit that very nicely here. Now for 19th place, yet another Nyssa deck, but this one plays Vivian Arcbow Ranger. It's a really good long game option. A lot of these decks don't have, you know, they're just trying to get Walking Ballista as big as they possibly can, and usually just end the game, you know. A Walking Ballista for 26, you're dead, you know. It's like, that sometimes happens, but, you know, I really like the idea of Vivian, just in case you need long game value, and it puts +1/+1 counters on Walking Ballista too. So, and Tireless Tracker as well, so you can draw more cards and all that. So, or not so you can draw more cards, excuse me. But just so you can make your tracker even bigger. Just a really, really cool inclusion there. And I like how these mono green decks, you know, they're kind of rote in how you build them, you know, but there are some open slots. And I think that the inclusion of Vivian here really illustrates that well. So, cool call. Didn't work out the way they wanted it to, but they still, you know, 19th place is better than nothing. For 20th place, though, yet another Nyssa deck. This one doesn't really... Yeah, this one has almost 0 evolution except for Whisperwood Elemental, which I will say, really interesting, because it helps protect you against sweepers, which is true of Whisperwood Elemental in any format. But, you know, in a format with Nyssa, sometimes they'll hit you with a sweeper when you got like 3 or 4 creature lands, and that sucks. That really hurts. So, in this case, you get to sacrifice Whisperwood Elemental and replace all your 3/3 lands with 2/2s, which is better than losing all your lands and having no creatures. So I like the idea of Whispered Elemental, but it might be a little bit too expensive. But I guess this is a ramp deck. You're going to play it anywhere, it's going to be here. This deck also plays Voracious Hydra, which we don't really see in these ramp decks very often. But cool call. But for Walking Ballista is definitely what you're actually trying to do in this deck. But moving on to 21st place, another Nyssa deck. You see how prevalent these decks were in this tournament, you know. And this one, again, a little bit different with the Oko Thief of Crowns, kind of a cheeky, that's I don't know, but I feel like the wink is implied. Like there's sarcasm in this Oko. And including it in this deck, you know. It's almost a meme, but you're playing blue for Hydroid Krasis anyway. Try Oko, prolong games and all that. It makes perfect sense, but moving on. Because again, these Nyssa decks are very similar. Here's another cat combo deck. This one plays Cloudblazer. How interesting is that, right? And Tithe Taker, just Dusk Dawn, just a really different version of this deck that also gets like Thraben Inspector, 3 Reflector Mage. So they are doing something very different. Charming Prince. Where's the Panharmonicon, right? Like, this looks like a Panharmonicon deck that just doesn't play Panharmonicon. So there's that. Really interesting build. I wish I had more to say about it, but honestly, I think that if you're on Cloudblazer in this format, you're probably doing something wrong. But that's as someone who did not come in 22nd at this tournament, so who knows. Coming up next, my favorite name of any MTGO user, Pastor of Muppets. Right here with 23rd place in the Pioneer Challenge. This is yet another Sultai mid-range deck, but this one plays Bugsy, the Scarab God. Really cool call here, but I don't know how well it worked out for them in the end. That said, I think the Scarab God is a card that we at least want to test, and they are testing multiple cards, Traverse the Ulvenwald also in this deck as a card advantage piece, or card selection piece at the very least. But you've got, Fatal Push, Abrupt Decay, Thoughtseize, Oko, Courser of Crewfix. This one also plays Grimflayer as just a crazy 2-drop option. Jace Vryn's Prodigy, Cletus in the main deck, Scavenging Goose in the main deck. So, you see a lot of these same cards that have been in these Sultai mid-range decks. But again, the build is not in any way set in stone. I love that about it. But moving on here as we round the corner, 24th place, another cat combo deck. This one plays Mizium Mortars, Deafening Clarion, Supreme Verdict, a lot of sweepers, trying to keep the board clear. I'm not sure how important a strategy that actually was in week 1. There were a lot of creature-based decks, and even like the Sultai mid-range decks. Kind of creature-based decks, and stuff like Deafening Clarion could be really important, actually, as like an early sweeper against all these ramp pieces to make sure you hit them before they get to Nyssa. I get the ideas here, but in the end, I just don't think this was the best version of cat combo you could be playing. Note, too, it's got Sarkhan the Masterless, so if you don't get this Healy Felidar combo going on, then you can just like turn all your walkers into creatures and swing in that way. So, again, like I was saying earlier with these cat combo decks, I like that this one is built in such a way that if you don't get the Saheeli combo, the cat combo, then you're probably drawn into a bunch of cards that are good anyway. But that said, I think Sarkhan might be a little slow for this format. Even cards like Narset might be a little bit slow for a format that's very, turn 2, turn 3 oriented from what we can tell. Moving on, though, this is, 25th place? Yeah, 25th place. Bonkaroonie. That's a good name, too. With a Feather the Redeemed deck. Now, we saw a few of these try to place highly over the weekend, and it's not bad, I guess. 25th place is 25th place, but, this is one of the cards that people were asking the most, not just me, but just in general. People were asking, is Feather good enough for Pioneer? And I don't think the answer is a resounding no, but I think that this is kind of proof that it's probably a step too slow for this format. I was excited about it too, a deck with Favored Hoplite. It's really cool because you get to combine the heroic mechanic with Feather, which is kind of like the heroic mechanic anyway. And 10th District Legionnaire, which is kind of like having a heroic creature anyway. So I like the idea, but I think the deck has to be refined before it's truly good enough. You get the spell base includes Defiant Strike, God's Willing, Reckless Rage, Temur Battle Rage, Titan Strength, just all really good looking spells. But I think that that's probably where all the innovation needs to happen in this format, or in this deck, to really, attack this format the way that it should. I'm just not sure that Feather is the strongest deck right now. It just looks like, in the face of all these other decks that play like extremely powerful cards, a cat combo, bunch of super powerful cards. Even though Felidar Guardian isn't the most powerful card, like every other deck or card in the deck is ridiculous. Same thing with Sultai Midrange. Just a deck full of crazy, A+ 5-star cards. Even the ramp decks, Walking Ballista, Hydroid Krasis, Nyssa, Llanowar Elves, they're just all 5-star, the height of the most powerful cards you could be playing. Whereas when you're sacrificing, good cards in your deck for this much synergy, I don't think that it's worth it this time around with these Feather decks. Because, there's synergy in these ramp decks. There's synergy even in the Sultai mid-range decks. There's some synergy. There's synergy in the Arclight Phoenix decks. And you don't have to play bad cards. So this is basically, think of it like a Phoenix deck. Kind of an aggro deck, wants to attack you for damage and all that, kill you that way. kind of combo-y in a way because it's got feather, and that requires you to build your deck in a very specific way with a bunch of sorcery or instants and stuff. So it has to be very spell-based and a very high deck building requirement, just like Arc like Phoenix. But the payoff is, I think, a little bit smaller than a deck like Phoenix in this format at present. So that's kind of my take, is if you're going to play a deck based around a creature, that's looking to attack in the air, 4 damage, and win the game that way, has a kind of combo feel to it, very, top-down build, that requires a lot of synergy and bad cards, even. Feather's probably not the right way to go. I think that Arclight Phoenix is probably just a much better version of a deck like this right now. That's nowhere near as vulnerable and doesn't have to play as many bad cards either. So, I don't know. I hate to say it, but that's my take on Boris Feather. But this is 26th place Vagar. This is our first company deck. How insane is that? That Collected Company might be too slow for this format. Mostly because Cat Combo exists, I think, is what's going on with that. If Cat Combo gets banned out of the format, I think Collected Company becomes much more powerful just immediately. And look at some of the cards it gets to play. Not only Collected Company, but you get Selfless Spirit. Where are you? Spell Queller. That's what I was looking for. Spell Queller is just so insane. This is a card that a little surprised we didn't see more of. But you also get kind of a Spirits build in this deck too. You get Empyrean Eagle. Where are you? Mausoleum Wanderer, Rattle Chains, Remorseful Clerics, Spell Queller, Selfless Spirits, Supreme Phantom. So it's basically, a Spirits deck that also plays Collected Company. So it's company, Spirit Company. And I hate that it only got 26th place because I want this deck to be so good. But again, you wonder, is the synergy worth it to play some kind of, below rate cards in a format like this? I don't think Rattle Chains is a bad card. I don't think that Selfless Spirit is a bad card. I don't think that Remorseful Cleric is a bad card, especially in a format where Arclight Phoenix is an important deck. I think Remorseful Cleric is probably really good. But at the same time, when you're playing Empyrean Eagle and Mausoleum Wanderer and, again, even cards like, Supreme Phantom, you're sacrificing a lot of what could just be really good cards in your deck to generate synergy. And in this case, I really don't know that it's worth it, even with Collected Company being in the deck. There's going to be some games you don't even get to Collected Company before you die to Cat Combo or Burn or whatever. So I'm just not sure this is the right choice, but when some bannings happen, I think Collected Company might be a really important deck to revisit. That said, too, I want to say this, too. I'm not sure that the Spirits build is the right way to go with it either, but it did the best out of all the company builds on the day, so keep that in mind. Moving on, though, 27th place, another interesting deck. This is like a Bogles deck, kind of, but it only plays the 8 creatures, Basar Tower Archer and Gladecover Scout, both hex-proof creatures you can then build a battleship onto, You've got Once Upon a Time to help you find those creatures in the first place, but there's also All That Glitters, make your guys huge. Cartouche of Solidarity in there. Ethereal Armor, make your guys huge. Griff's Boon. Awesome. I miss Griff's Boon so much. from the last Innistrad format. Madcap Skills, really bad card, but really good in these Bogles builds. Always has been. Sentinel's Mark, 6 Sense. Get to play with this again. So cool. Unflinching Courage, always... it's basically an Armadillo Cloak. Always cool to see this card seeing play. So I really like what they're doing, but this is another one where, just like the aggro decks that have to play a bunch of, instants and sorceries and spells because they play Feather or whatever, this is one where, you're locked into a bunch of enchantments. And I think that there's a lot of evolution that could happen here in these particular slots. How much does the deck really need to play 6 Sense or Madcap Skills or whatever, Sentinel's Mark for that matter? I'm not sure that there aren't way better options in the aura slots for a deck like this. And you probably need at least one more good hexproof creature, so there's that too. And I want Bogles to work, and I'm really excited about it. You can tell that I'm kind of jacked about this deck, but it needs to be a little bit better. But anyway, 28th place, Min Cash. This is our only mono white aggro deck here. And I think that this is, again, kind of boring because, you just play Banalish Marshal and then everything on down, a bunch of 1-drops. I mean, it's white weenies. It's a very kind of ho-hum, yawn, white weenies. We've seen it a million times before, but how good the 1-drops actually are in this deck does excite me a little bit. You get Kithion, just a couple of copies, but Mardu Woe Reaper, I miss it so much. Soldier of the Pantheon, I missed it so much. Thraben Inspector, I missed it so much. Even Boros Elite. I kind of miss this little guy a little bit. So, you get Dauntless Bodyguard still. Not the White Orchid. It's so good. So, you only play 18 lands. That's always really exciting too. So, I really love this mono white build. And I know that mono white isn't a build that excites everybody, but I do think that it has some legs. Again, especially some cards get banned. And this deck's clock gets better. If this deck's clock is turn 4, then sometimes it's just going to die to cat combo. It is also, just like I said with some of the other aggro decks, it's kept in check by Abrupt Decay, Fatal Push, all that. So aggro decks are just fair in this format. I think they're fighting an uphill battle against Decay and Fatal Push, but if a deck can do it, it's mono red or mono white, and they've got some of the best options in the format in terms of 1-drops right now, and even 2-drops too. So I don't think it's a fool's errand to play aggro in Pioneer. I just think that we have to shore up the slots before we do it. And we probably have to wait for some bannings, too, before aggro really takes off. But 29th place, another Healy deck. This one, very similar, if not almost exactly the same as the first build. Okay, it's got one main deck of Braid. So that's a difference. But, yeah, almost everything else is exactly the same. It cuts down a Teferi. So it can play that one copy of a Braid in the main deck. But aside from that, we've seen this deck before. Very popular deck at the tournament. We'll talk more about that in another video very soon. But in 30th place, really getting towards the end here, another one of these Sultai decks. This one a little bit different. We got Obstinate Nixilis reignited as an interesting call here, but I think it's a little bit too slow, all things considered. Imrakul, the Promised Land, and another interesting call, but again, probably slightly too slow. Slightly too slow for a format like this. And probably the coolest card in the deck, Pack Rat, which I really think is actually super interesting in this format right now, especially in a Sultai deck that's looking to generate long game value and just have these grindy cards. I think Pack Rat is definitely a card that deserves a second look. You see a lot of these decks main decking Scavenging Ooze, which decks are want to do anyway, but main decking Scavenging Ooze, which we'll probably see more of now that Phoenix is like a known real quantity in this format. But anyway, main deck Scavenging Ooze, main deck Cletus and stuff like that. And Pack Rat, I think, is if you're trying to find these main deck options that generate value, it's a great option that people don't really think of so much. It's just a really important card in its standard environment too. I don't know why it slipped to people's minds in Pioneer, but yeah, I think it's actually a really cool call. You had to come down one Courser of Krufix to play this, and a couple of other value generating cards like Rogue Refiner, for instance, you don't get in this deck. But at the same time, if you just go straight, basically green-black, because this isn't Sultai, if you just go green-black, you do get Traverse, you get Vessel, not the best card in the world, but still important card advantage in a deck like this. Grapple with the Past, again, important card advantage in a deck like this. That's kind of graveyard-centric. You're trying to cast Imrakul, you're trying to get value out of Grimflayer, all that. Pack Rat helps you discard things into your graveyard, so this is much more graveyard-centric than some of the other, green-black value lists that we've seen so far, but I think that it is, just on paper, a little bit messy, because it plays a bunch of silver bullets and stuff. I'm just not sure how great that is. Now, Traverse the Overwall to help you find those silver bullets some of the time. So we'll Vessel and all that. But at the same time, I don't think that what is kind of a Delirium build is going to be, Delirium build is going to be the best deck in Pioneer. I want it to be, don't get me wrong, but I think that, again, this is one of those decks that has to play stuff like, again, Grapple, Vessel, when it could be playing just strictly more powerful cards in those slots. So moving on here to number 31, we have the only approach build. Okay, so this is really the dedicated control build on the list. It actually does play counterspells, amazingly. This is one of those formats where Teferi Time Raveler is such a prevalent card, especially in these cat combo decks, that counterspells aren't necessarily the best plan to be on. That said, this one does play at least a couple of Absorb, a couple of other, early counters and stuff, but we've got Azorius Charm in here, one copy of Dig Through Time, a Dovin's Veto, again, another counterspell, Opt, Sphinx's Revelation, just the one copy. A lot of people really stoked about being able to play this card again. Probably way too slow for the format, though. Syncopate, another early counterspell. Elixir of Immortality to shuffle things back in. You can often win that way in these decks. Plus Detention Sphere, Seal Away, Search for Ensconce. You know, a couple of pieces of removal, then a piece of card advantage here. So very typically built in terms of how a control deck is usually built. But just really powerful options. You know, Approach is a win con, Elixir is a win con, Teferi, Hero of Dominaria is basically a win con because it tucks itself back in. Elspeth is an actual win con in the deck. So just one of those annoying blue-white control decks that has a lot of really good options in this format. But that said, it didn't do great, so keep that in mind. You know, again, this is one of those situations where I do think dedicated control wasn't the best call week one, but now that the format is shaping up, and especially in the next few weeks, into the first month of the format, blue-white control will be able to sort of, you know, adjust its card choices accordingly, and it'll probably be a better deck before it's all said and done. But moving on to 32nd place, the last deck we're going to talk about. It's a Healy deck. This one more energy-centric, you know, all 4 Tune with Ether, all 4 Rogue Refiner, all 4 Harness Lightning, so very much reminiscent of the Cat Combo deck just from that standard. You know, from Kaladesh standard. So, but this one gets to play Elvish Visionary, Gilded Goose as well, Reflector Mage, but again, you know, Oko, Teferi Time Raveler. So it gets some new pieces, and some of these new pieces are very reminiscent of what the other Healy decks are playing. But this one is far more, you know, on the nose, very much more similar to the old Healy decks than it used to be. Just almost zero innovation in this Teamer Energy list. But that is all of the Pioneer decks from the very first Pioneer Challenge. I hope that you had fun on this one, and if you enjoyed it, by the way, make sure you like it, because a lot of work went into sort of preparing for this, and just a lot of work went into making the video in the first place. You know, it was a long video where I'm just talking the entire time. So if you enjoyed that content and the things that I had to say, even if you didn't enjoy them, but you enjoyed not enjoying them, right? I mean, you just hate watching and go, oh, this guy has stupid opinions. What a fat chud. Even if you think that, like the video, because you had fun one way or the other, right? Also, subscribe to the channel, hit up the Patreon, link in the description to that. $1 a month is all I ask. Really helps support the content around here. And yeah, check out TCG Player, where I'll have links in the description to each and every one of these deck lists in case you want to pick them up, you know, whichever one that you like the most, you know. Actually, what I'm going to do is I think put 10 deck lists from this, because 32 deck lists all fed into Bitly links is going to be really, really hard. So I'm going to put 10 decks from this in the description down there. You just, yeah, check those out. Just hitting the affiliate link helps me. But if you buy stuff from the affiliate link, it really helps. So do that stuff. And, yeah, I just hope you enjoyed the content. I'm not going to waste too much more of your time, because I've already been here talking for ever. But like I said, I hope you enjoyed it. I lived to do this. So Pioneer looks like a really interesting format, and once there's a couple of bans, I think that opens the format up even more to, you know, archetypes we didn't see in this whole top 32. I think there's things sort of knocking on the door, especially like the Jeskai Ascendancy combo decks, you know, with or without Imri or Sylvan Awakening or whatever. I think that those decks are sort of really wanting in right now. And once you get rid of these decks that just win on turn 3 or 4, like Cat Combo, I think those decks are a lot more viable, along with all the aggro decks, even in the face of Abrupt Decay and Fatal Push, Thoughtseize, all that. I think that, you know, the aggro decks are fairly well positioned once there's not a combo deck they can't go underneath, right? So, yeah, those are my opinions for now, but I'll have the top 5 to 10 cards that'll be banned in Pioneer really, really soon, and there's a deck tech coming out soon. Yeah, definitely by the end of the night. Yeah, it's 5:42 now, so I need to, as soon as I get done with this, got to start working on a Patreon post for the next deck. So patrons, get ready for that. And I guess I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.